Can you all hear me okay? Or do you want me to put on the loud? I know as I get older, Dawn, and my hearing starts to fade, I'm talking louder. I'm good? Oh, yeah. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Back at the beginning of the year, when we kicked off the 125th anniversary celebration for Grace Lutheran Church here, having been formed in the original church built in 1894, John Berner asked me if I would consider doing a sermon, and Dawn too, a sermon or a talk on a Sunday relative to agriculture and the importance and role that agriculture plays, not just in this church and this community, but around the world. And as many of you know, when John and Dawn, I was honored to be asked and have this opportunity because many of you know I spent my life in working in and around the agriculture field. The first 15 years of my working career, full-time farming on the farm a couple miles up the road on 47 where my immigrant grandparents settled as they immigrated from Sweden. And then I transitioned into several other roles as land changed hands and more houses were built, less farmland in the area. But I spent a lot of my time in the finance area in agriculture and ultimately had the honor of serving as a nominee of former President Bush to the agency in Washington that oversees agricultural lending in the United States. And that was a great opportunity and wonderful opportunity because I had the chance to travel to every state in the country and see the different types of agricultures, hear about the histories of those regions, and see what was changing in the field. But I wanted to start again today, and it was a pleasure to follow Suzanne in the readings too, because we're connected. Our grandfathers on the Strom side were brothers that immigrated from Sweden. And you know, the forces and changes of that era that brought so many to this community. And I know, while I've seen a lot, I know people like Russ Goldine and Dolly and Margaret. I mean, your connection to the agricultural sector in direct farming and Margaret, your family provided supplies for so many of those farmers a century ago that came to this area. We still have it's called a triple box wooden wagon on our farm that my grandfather purchased about 1915 from Margaret's family store here, Abrahamson's, because it still has on the side, it says E.M. Abrahamson, Little Lake, Illinois. It's a John Deere wagon. So so many were tied to agriculture. I also need to stop and say for a second that I feel like I'm the luckiest guy in the world because Dawn asked, did I have a title for this discussion this morning, and I didn't come up with anything good. And I guess they could be called several things, and one of them could be a tale of two Bibles, too, because as I spent a little time earlier this week to do a little research on Bible verses, and I know there's things in Genesis and references through so many books in the Bible to food and tilling the soil. When I went to look for the Bible, I realized I grabbed Twyla's Bible. I'm the luckiest guy because I married a young gal when I met her when we were teenagers, and we married. She was still a teenager when we married. I was just barely 20. We were quite young, but she came from a family of Swedish immigrants that had ties to agriculture as well. But when I grabbed her Bible and I looked at it, and I've grabbed this one many times, it sits in our living room on the coffee table, and as I opened it, I realized it's well worn. Dear, you got this in 1966 as you're from the Community Congregational Church in Elton. And it's well worn, the ribbons are frayed, and there's a lot of underlining in this Bible. And one of the first things that this was in the Bible, I was going to look for verses, so I opened up this piece of paper that was stuck in there, and it is Genesis 1, verse 29. It says, "And God said, Behold, I give you every plant yielding seed, which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree with the seed in its fruit, and you shall have them for food." You know, reference to, again, the need for food, for nourishment in agriculture. I just want to say the Tale of Two Bibles, mine was on the bookshelf, is not nearly as well worn. It definitely married a woman. And then that Tale of Two Bibles goes to these two books, which we have kept as home and handed down from our parents and our grandparents. One of them is the Swedish flag, written in Swedish. I can't read a word of it, but I know where it originated. Our grandparents carried these with them when they came from Sweden. And I realize we are a country of immigrants, and I don't want to just say Sweden, 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 because I realize so many came from all parts of Europe and other places. Some long ago, some more recently. And that's a benefit of our church and our society. But this Bible was in Swedish. This, I assume, was the first English Bible they purchased, because it's the same size. I'm sure they carried it to church on Sundays, other places. It's in English. And the transition and the challenges and the hardships, as I think about the theme of this Bible school, shipwrecked. So many of the immigrants had the courage and the bravery to set foot on a ship, going to a place they'd only heard about, America, for opportunity, because things were difficult in their homelands. And in Sweden in particular, if you look at the history in that country, the period from 1750 to 1850 in Sweden, the population doubled. Went from 2 million to 4 million people. And the resources were limited. The crown controlled most of the land. And so as families grew, they had to divide the farms up into smaller and smaller tracts. My mother, Edna, who some of you still remember, she was a daughter of a man that came from Sweden, Carl Olsen, around 1910, between 1910 and 15. And he had brothers that followed him. There were actually 9 brothers in the family, 2 girls in Sweden. At all 9 of the sons set foot in America, but 3 ultimately went back. On the Strom side, that's Suzanne and our family, all the brothers came from Sweden, and they stayed, and that basically ended that Strom line in Sweden, the immediate Strom line. But my mother kept contact with her Swedish relatives, and we've had the good fortune now the next generation is getting to know. They're involved in agriculture. But we went to the farm where my mother's mother, Fredrika, Fredrika here is the great-great-granddaughter of Fredrika that my grandmother came to Sweden. We went to her farm, and when you saw the land, this was in Småland area of Sweden. The farm was about maybe 10, 12 acres in size, and the soil was so full of rocks. The rocks had been put into fence lines, and there was no field on that farm bigger than an acre. And the fence line of rocks was that tall, that wide around every field, because they had cleared the land. It was such difficult land to farm. Just 2 weeks ago, our youngest son, Tyler, was in Stockholm for a conference. He took his wife and his younger son, and then he went to visit some of Edna's family back on her father's side. And when we've gone back and forth, we've exchanged gifts. We send things over there, they send things back. Usually it's nice linens, or Sweden is known for some very fine crystal. The company Orrefors and Costa Boda were two prominent crystal makers. So there's a lot of interest in the Dahlem horses that you see so much at the Swedish time. But when Tyler came back, he said, "Dad, they send a unique gift for you this time from Sweden, from the farm where my Swedish grandfather Carl was born and raised." And when I looked at it at first, there was laughter because the kids and the grandkids were sitting around. And then I realized the history and the story of agriculture and toil is embedded in this horseshoe. It's well worn. It probably slipped off the horse's foot onto the farm. This is near Vara, Sweden, about 5 hours west of Stockholm. A very rich agricultural area, but it laid in the soil. They found it. They put it in a shelf. They decided it should come to America and reside with a family that's connected and with them. But the message in this, as I was thinking about agriculture today, is when you look at agriculture in the United States today, and it has changed so much from those times, in the late 1800s, when you had the mass immigration, and 1/4 of the Swedish population came to America. About 1.2 million Swedes between 1865 and really World War I. World War I slowed down and basically shut off the immigration. And when you think of that much of the population at that time, in the United States, agriculture employed almost 95% of the U.S. population, because there was need on the farms, hand labor, horse-drawn implements. The food and agriculture system was about 95% of our population. Today, that has switched the other way. Less than 2% of the population are involved in agriculture, because we're a society that has grown in many ways. And the global economy has shifted and shaped so much of what's going on in agriculture today. When you look at the Lily Lake area here too, and the history of this area and why so many settled here, as Chicago grew from the 1820s and 30s forward, more population, in Chicago there was a lot of dairy farms in the city, in Chicago proper. And then with the Great Fire in 1871, when the folklore is Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over the lantern, Chicago said at that point, no more livestock in the city other than the horses. And at that time, there was tens of thousands of horses every day. So that was kind of a first ordinance, you say, when Chicago said, let's move this out. And then at the same time, you had the advent of the railroad building, and the Great Western Railroad line came right out of Elmhurst into St. Charles and out here right through Wasco and Lily Lake. And the areas here became a magnet for dairy farmers. The early settlers, if you go down to Garfield Farm, it's a good living history museum. The early settlers here were very diversified. So they had a few cows, they'd have oxen, they'd raise wheat, some corn, some oats. But it was really this push coming out of the railroad that brought the ability for the dairy farmers really to thrive in this area, because there was so much demand for milk in Chicago. And what would have been, prior to the railroad, a three-day journey to get by wagon from the Fox River to the city, that was just a matter of hours. And so you could, and then with the advent of refrigeration and things, so many small dairy farms popped up in this area. And you can still see remnants of the old barns in here. But they had a faith that was really, I get back to the Bible, they had a faith that never ended. I was born in 1956. This church was built, this building was built in 1960. I don't really recall the original church. But you realize before the advent of cell phones and going back in time, telephones and all of those things, I mean, you go back a century ago or more, 125 years ago, the church was also the social gathering place for the community. I mean, it's where the community met every Sunday to see each other, to say hello, to find out what was going on. So it was the social center of the community in many ways. And the Lutheran faith in this area, if you look at the history of the Lutheran Church in Sweden, Sweden was Catholic largely before the 1500s. And then the king of Sweden basically decreed, we're going to switch to Lutheran. And so there was a strong Lutheran presence. A lot of these settlers that came here began to form the church in 1894. But that faith was never ending for them. And as a child coming here, I can still remember some of the founding members in this church, the Eric Johnsons and others, who had been lifelong farmers, most of them. I can remember the strength of their hands, the disfigurement of their fingers, because they had worked so hard. Many of them had lost fingers because agriculture was a very, very difficult and dangerous occupation as well. But their faith is what kept them moving forward. I think from the moment they made the decision to leave Sweden, to carry a Bible, I mean, to think, and one of the most moving moments for me in Sweden was a number of years ago. We were there, and at the house where my mother, Dad, Carl Olson was raised, there's a wrought iron structure over a stone gate in front of the house. And I paused there for a second and I realized my grandfather, as a 19-year-old, kissed his mother and father goodbye, left for America, never saw them again. There's an interesting, on Swedish history, there's an interesting book series that the author published these in the 1950s, I think it was early 60s. Wilhelm Moberg. It's a 4-part series. The first book is called The Immigrants, and it's about the Swedish immigrants' departure from Sweden and the challenges of getting things ready, deciding what to take, what to leave behind, going to the ship, the treacherous journey arriving in New York. The second series is Unto a Good Land, and it talks about their journey from New York west, most of them coming through this area, certainly many of them stopping in here, but many continuing up to Minnesota and the Dakotas. The third in that series is called The Settlers. And it talks about them finding the land, settling the land. I mean, this was during the Homestead Act period. And land, if you farmed the land for a minimal fee, you could then own the land. And it was hard work. And then the last book in that series is called The Last Letter Home. And you realize so many of them have left loved ones and then had to write that last letter home to say, we've made it here, we're staying in America, and didn't have that opportunity to say goodbye face to face, but it was through the letter. So the challenges and the hardships they faced came through their faith. So, with a couple of Bibles in their pocket, leaving a history behind them. You know, the folklore is if you hang, Amber, tell me if I'm right, if you hang you're supposed to hang a horseshoe like this because that means you catch good luck. All of the pieces came together for it. And then one last thing I would like to just say is, after my grandfather died in 1941 of cancer, Frederica, his wife, decided she wanted to go back to Sweden, but it was the outbreak of World War II, so she delayed her travel back to Sweden until after the end of the war. And on the ship over and then the ship back, she went over and spent about 2 months because Frederica was one of 4 daughters. Her 3 sisters were still in Sweden. She hadn't seen them for 35 years. And she wanted to go back rather than that last letter home. She wanted to go home and see them one more time. She wrote, she cross-stitched this on the ship both ways. And Twyla and I are fortunate enough to have this hanging in our living room. I had to get on the ladder this morning to get it down because I had forgotten. I was going to bring it. But this translation is Hemetsvika Arsforsnan Hamet. I don't know if I have that pronounced, especially that last word the way, but this is an old Swedish language, and it simply says, a home's good fortune or luck is in content. And I think, again, through the challenges and tragedies of life, their faith helped them be content in their lives here. Happiness came with that. And I think that's a message for all of us. In the life's daily challenges that we find around agriculture, today, this year, it's a particularly challenging year for the farmers in the community who have battled rains, and there's always a risk. You know, years ago, someone told me, a farmer has got to be the world's biggest optimist because he takes a seed in the spring, he puts it in a cold, dark soil with a hope, a faith that God will provide.